You are not lacking ability. You are lacking something far more dangerous. You behave as if someone else is better than you, and that alone is enough to keep you beneath them. Not because they are superior, but because you have already placed yourself lower before anything even begins. You speak too much when silence would serve you better. You explain when no one asked. You react when all that was required was observation. You try to prove yourself when those who truly carry value never feel the need to, and you call that humility. It isn't. It's a subtle form of self-dismissal. You don't lose your power in one moment. You lose it one reaction at a time. Every time you rush to reply to a message because you're afraid of being misunderstood, every time you let someone else's mood dictate your internal state, every time you need validation just to feel like you're enough, you are sending a clear signal to the world that you don't trust yourself. And the world always responds to that signal with precision. But this is only the surface. Most people never realize that the way you see yourself doesn't just shape your behavior, it trains others how to treat you. And if you don't correct this at the root, you will continue living as a smaller version of yourself, no matter how hard you try to grow. The problem is not that you react. The problem is what your reactions reveal. Because every reaction, every urge to explain, to defend, to prove, is not just behavior. It is identity leaking through your actions. Most people think they are just responding to situations. They believe they are being reasonable, communicative, even mature. But look closer. The person who needs to reply instantly is not being attentive, they're being controlled. The person who keeps explaining themselves is not being clear, they are seeking permission to exist as they are. The person who cannot stay silent in the face of misunderstanding is not strong, they are dependent on being seen correctly. And that dependence quietly erodes something most people never even realize they are losing: self-respect. Because self-respect is not what you say to yourself in private. It is what you tolerate in your own behavior. It is the standard you refuse to drop below, even when no one is watching. A reactive person lives at the mercy of everything outside of them. A message appears and their mind follows. A tone shifts and their emotions shift with it. A moment of silence from someone else, and suddenly they feel the need to fill it, to fix it, to control it. They don't live from themselves. They live from what is happening around them. But a Stoic does something radically different. They don't rush to respond. They don't feel the need to correct every misunderstanding. They don't chase clarity from people who are committed to confusion, because their authority does not come from being understood. It comes from being grounded, from knowing that not every moment deserves their energy, from understanding that attention is a currency and most people are bankrupt because they spend it on everything. This is where most people get it wrong. They think strength is about doing more, saying more, proving more. But real strength is restraint. Real strength is the ability to feel the pull to react and choose stillness instead. To feel the urge to speak and decide that silence carries more weight. And if you're honest, you've felt this gap before. The gap between who you are when you are calm, centered, in control, and who you become when something triggers you. When a message is left unread, when someone questions your value, when you feel ignored, overlooked, or disrespected. In those moments, you don't act from strength, you act from fear. Fear of not being enough, fear of being dismissed, fear of losing control over how you are perceived. And so you compensate, you talk more, you explain more, you react faster, not because it works, but because for a brief moment, it gives you the illusion of control. But the cost is always the same. You trade your inner authority for temporary relief. You trade your standards for emotional comfort. You trade your power for validation that never truly satisfies. And the most dangerous part is this: it becomes a pattern so familiar that you stop questioning it. You start believing this is just who you are, but it's not. It's who you've trained yourself to be. And that is exactly why this matters more than you think. because this is not about fixing a few behaviors. This is about confronting the silent architecture of your identity, the part of you that decides, without words, whether you stand firm or collapse into reaction, whether you move through life with weight or with noise. And from here, we go deeper. The first mistake is simple, and that's exactly why it's so dangerous. You think confidence is something you prove. It isn't. Confidence is something you assume before anything happens. Most people walk into conversations, opportunities, even relationships, already negotiating their own value. They listen more to how they are being perceived than to what they actually stand for. They adjust their tone. They soften their opinions. They over-explain their intentions. Not because they lack intelligence, but because they lack certainty in their own position. And that uncertainty leaks into everything. You see it in the way someone types and deletes a message 5 times before sending it. You see it when someone hesitates to say what they really think, then compensates by talking too much afterward. You see it when someone accepts subtle disrespect, laughs it off, and later replays the moment in their head wishing they had responded differently. They think the problem is the situation. It's not. The problem is that they entered the moment already assuming they were not the strongest presence in the room. And once you accept that internally, everything you do becomes an attempt to climb back up. You start performing instead of being. You start managing perception instead of holding position. And here's what most people completely miss. The more you try to prove your value, the more you signal that it is still in question. Think about the last time you felt the urge to explain yourself, not because it was necessary, but because you didn't want to be misunderstood. That moment right there reveals everything, because a person who truly stands in their own authority understands something most people never learn. Not being understood is not a threat. It is a filter. It separates those who are aligned with you from those who are not. But when you don't believe that, you chase clarity, you chase approval, you chase agreement. And in doing so, you slowly train people to see you as someone who needs to be interpreted correctly in order to feel stable. That is not strength, that is dependence disguised as communication. A Stoic mind operates differently. It does not rush to close every gap in perception. It does not panic when silence appears. It does not feel the need to fill every space with explanation, because it starts from a different assumption. I am already enough. My role is not to convince, it is to embody. And when you truly adopt that, your behavior changes without force. You speak less, but your words carry more weight. You respond slower, but with more precision. You stop trying to win every interaction, and instead you start holding your position regardless of the outcome. This is where real power begins. Not in dominating others, not in being louder, but in removing the internal need to be validated before you allow yourself to feel solid. Because the moment you stop asking, do they see my value, and start operating from I decide my value, everything shifts. Your energy becomes stable. Your presence becomes grounded. Your reactions become intentional instead of automatic. And people feel that, even if they can't explain it. They sense that you are not easily moved, not easily influenced, not easily shaken, and that alone changes how they interact with you. But here's the deeper layer most people avoid. Acting as if you are the best is not arrogance, it is responsibility. Because if you don't hold yourself at that standard, you will unconsciously lower your behavior to match your doubts. You will accept less, tolerate more, react quicker, and every one of those choices reinforces the same identity. Someone who is still waiting to feel worthy. So the real shift is not in what you say or do, it's in what you assume before you say or do anything at all. And if that assumption is weak, everything built on top of it will be unstable. But if that assumption is solid, quiet, grounded, unshaken, then even your silence will speak for you. The second layer goes deeper, much deeper than behavior. Because even if you fix how you act on the surface, if the need underneath remains untouched, you will always fall back into the same patterns. And that need is this: the need to be seen correctly in order to feel in control. Most people don't react because they are emotional. They react because they are attached to how they are perceived, attached to being understood, attached to not losing position in the eyes of others. And that attachment creates a silent pressure inside them, a pressure to respond quickly, to correct, to clarify, to defend, not because the situation demands it, but because their identity feels threatened without it. Think about how subtle this is. Someone sends a message with a slightly cold tone, nothing explicit, nothing aggressive, but something shifts, and suddenly your mind starts filling in the gaps. Did I say something wrong? Are they pulling away? Do I need to fix this? And before you even realize it, you are no longer grounded. You are reacting to a story your mind created to protect your image. So you reply faster than necessary, you adjust your tone, you try to regain balance, but the balance you're trying to regain was never external, it was internal. And this is where most people lose without even noticing. Because they think they are managing relationships, when in reality, they are managing anxiety. They think they are being communicative, when in reality, they are trying to control perception. They think they are staying connected, when in reality, they are afraid of disconnection. And fear is a terrible foundation for behavior, because anything built on fear requires constant maintenance, constant checking, constant adjustment, constant reaction. That's why it's exhausting. Not because life is heavy, but because your mind is constantly trying to stabilize something that was never meant to be controlled in the first place. A Stoic sees this clearly. They understand that other people's perceptions are not something to chase or fix. They are something to observe, to allow, to pass. Because the moment you tie your internal state to how others interpret you, you have already lost control over yourself. And control is everything. Not control over others, not control over outcomes, control over your own state, your own reactions, your own energy. That is inner authority. And inner authority cannot coexist with the need for external validation. They cancel each other out. You either stand in yourself or you lean on others to feel stable. There is no middle ground. And if you're honest, you felt this conflict before. The part of you that wants to stay calm, grounded, unaffected, and the part of you that wants to respond, to fix, to be understood immediately. That tension is not random. It is the gap between who you are and who you are trying to become. And most people keep feeding the weaker side. Every time they give in to the urge, every time they let a moment pull them out of themselves, every time they prioritize perception over position, they reinforce the same identity. Someone who is still controlled by what is happening around them. But the shift happens when you see it for what it is, not as personality, not as just how you are, but as conditioning, as a learned pattern that can be unlearned. Because the truth is, you were not born needing to explain yourself to feel valid. You learned that. You were not born reacting to every shift in energy. You trained yourself into that sensitivity. And what is trained can be retrained, but only if you are willing to sit in the discomfort of not reacting, to let a message sit unanswered without rushing to fix the silence, to let someone misunderstand you without immediately correcting it, to feel the pull to explain and choose not to. That is where the real work begins. Not in controlling others, not in managing outcomes, but in mastering the space between stimulus and response. Because in that space, your identity is revealed. And in that space, your power is either strengthened or given away. This is where everything flips, not at the level of behavior, not even at the level of emotion, but at the level most people avoid because it forces them to confront something uncomfortable, who they believe they are. Because your reactions are not random. They are not situational. They are consistent with an internal image you carry, whether you are aware of it or not. And that image is shaping everything. The way you speak, the way you hesitate, the way you tolerate things you shouldn't, the way you overextend, overexplain, overreact, it all traces back to one thing: your self-concept. If somewhere beneath the surface you see yourself as someone who might not be enough, then every interaction becomes a test. Every silence becomes a threat. Every misunderstanding becomes something you feel responsible to fix, and you won't even realize it's happening. You'll call it personality, you'll call it caring, you'll call it being communicative. But the truth is simpler and harder to accept. You are behaving in alignment with a version of yourself that is still trying to earn its place. And that version will always be unstable, because anything that needs to be earned externally can be taken away externally. That is why your reactions feel so automatic, because they are not decisions, they are expressions of identity. You don't think before reacting, you reveal what you already believe about yourself. And if that belief is weak, your behavior will be inconsistent. One moment calm, the next moment triggered. One moment confident, the next moment seeking reassurance. Not because you lack discipline, but because your identity is fragmented. You haven't fully decided who you are. And until you do, your environment will keep deciding for you. This is the route most people never reach. They try to fix behavior without upgrading identity. They try to control reactions without questioning the self-image generating those reactions. And that's why nothing sticks. Because you can't outperform your self-concept for long. Eventually, you fall back into alignment with what you believe you are. So if you see yourself as someone who needs to be liked, you will keep adjusting. If you see yourself as someone who needs to be understood, you will keep explaining. If you see yourself as someone who can be overlooked, you will keep reacting to prove otherwise. But if you shift that identity quietly, internally, without needing to announce it, everything changes. You no longer ask for respect. You operate from it. You no longer chase clarity. You allow perception to reveal alignment. You no longer react to every shift. You choose what deserves your response. Because now your behavior is not driven by insecurity. It is driven by standards. And standards are not something you negotiate in the moment. They are something you decide in advance. This is the difference between someone who is easily shaken and someone who is not. The first person adapts their behavior based on what is happening. The second person holds their behavior based on who they are. And that distinction is everything. Because when your identity is clear, your reactions become predictable in the best way. Not emotional, not impulsive, but consistent, grounded, intentional. You stop leaking energy into things that don't deserve it. You stop giving access to people who haven't earned it. You stop collapsing into moments that used to pull you out of yourself. And slowly, something changes. Not in how loud you are, not in how much you prove, but in how little you need to do to maintain your position, because your presence starts to carry weight on its own. And here's the truth most people avoid, because it demands responsibility. If your life feels unstable, it is not because the world is unpredictable. It is because your identity is. Fix that and everything else begins to follow. Now it becomes visible. Not in what you think, not in what you say, but in how you move through ordinary moments that most people overlook. Because real strength does not appear when everything is easy. It reveals itself in the small, quiet decisions where no one is watching, the way you handle a delayed reply, the way you respond when someone slightly disrespects you, the way you carry yourself when attention is not on you. That is where embodiment begins. A person with inner authority does not rush, not because they are slow, but because they are not being pulled. Their phone lights up and they see it, but they don't immediately reach for it. There is a pause, not forced, not artificial, just space. Space between stimulus and response. And in that space, there is control. Most people don't have that space. Their attention is constantly hijacked. A notification appears, and their mind follows instantly. A message comes in, and their emotional state shifts before they even read it fully. They live in reaction loops, moving from one external trigger to the next. But someone grounded operates differently. They choose when to engage. They decide what deserves their energy. And more importantly, they are comfortable not responding right away. Not because they are playing games, but because they are not owned by urgency that comes from outside. Watch how they handle silence. When a conversation pauses, they don't scramble to fill it. They don't rush to say something just to keep the connection alive. They let it breathe. They allow space without interpreting it as rejection. Because their sense of stability is not tied to constant interaction. It is rooted internally, and that changes everything. Watch how they handle tension. When someone challenges them, they don't immediately defend, they don't raise their voice, they don't try to overpower the moment. They listen, they observe, and when they respond, it is measured, precise, without excess emotion, not because they don't feel, but because they don't let feeling control expression. That restraint is visible, it has weight, you can feel it without them saying much. And then there is the way they walk away. This is where most people fail. They stay too long in places that drain them, conversations that go nowhere, dynamics that require constant effort just to maintain basic respect. They tell themselves to be patient, to be understanding, but what they are really doing is tolerating what does not meet their standards. A person with inner strength does not overstay. They don't announce their exit. They don't create drama. They simply disengage, cleanly, quietly, without needing the other person to agree with their decision, because their loyalty is not to comfort, it is to self-respect, and self-respect is not loud. It does not need to be explained. It shows in what you no longer participate in. It shows in what you no longer respond to. It shows in how little access you give to things that disturb your internal state. This is embodiment, not a checklist, not a set of techniques, but a way of moving that reflects a deeper decision, that your energy is not available for everything, that your attention is not cheap, that your presence is not something people get access to without alignment. And the more you live like this, the more something shifts without you forcing it. People begin to adjust around you, not because you demanded it, but because your behavior set a boundary without words. They sense that you are not easily pulled, not easily influenced, not easily shaken, and that creates a different kind of respect. Not the loud kind, not the performative kind, but the quiet kind that comes from consistency. Because in a world full of reaction, restraint stands out. In a world full of noise, silence carries weight. And in a world where most people are constantly trying to prove themselves, the one who doesn't becomes impossible to ignore. This is where it stops being about situations and starts becoming about how you choose to exist in time. Because at some point, you have to face a question most people spend their entire lives avoiding. How long are you going to keep negotiating with a weaker version of yourself? Not in big dramatic moments, but in the quiet, daily choices that slowly define who you become. The extra message you didn't need to send, the explanation you gave that no one asked for, the reaction you justified because it felt right in the moment. These seem small, insignificant, but they are not. They are votes. Votes for the identity you are reinforcing every single day. And time does not ignore those votes. It compounds them. That's the part most people underestimate. They think growth comes from big decisions, big changes, big breakthroughs. It doesn't. It comes from repeated alignment or repeated compromise. Every time you choose self-respect over immediate comfort, you strengthen something invisible but permanent. Every time you choose silence over unnecessary reaction, you build stability that carries into the next moment. Every time you let something pass without attaching your identity to it, you loosen the grip the world has on you. And over time, those choices create a completely different person, not louder, not more aggressive, but more grounded, more deliberate, more difficult to disturb. But the opposite is also true. Every time you react without thinking, you reinforce impulsiveness. Every time you chase validation, you reinforce dependence. Every time you lower your standards to maintain connection, you teach yourself that your peace is negotiable, and that becomes your pattern. Not because you decided it consciously, but because you allowed it repeatedly. This is where Stoicism becomes more than a mindset. It becomes a way of relating to time itself. Because a Stoic understands that not every moment needs to be won. Not every interaction needs to be resolved. Not every perception needs to be corrected. Some things are meant to pass. Some misunderstandings are meant to remain. Some distances are meant to grow. And that is not loss, that is alignment. Because when you stop trying to control everything in the present, you start protecting something far more valuable, your long-term self-respect. And long-term self-respect is not built on how you feel in a single moment. It is built on what you consistently refuse to become. You refuse to become reactive. You refuse to become dependent on approval. You refuse to become someone who sacrifices inner stability just to maintain external harmony. And that refusal shapes your life in ways that are not immediately visible but deeply felt over time. You begin to notice that fewer things disturb you. Fewer situations pull you out of yourself. Fewer people have the ability to shift your state, not because the world changed, but because you did. Because you stopped participating in patterns that once controlled you. And here is the shift that elevates everything. You stop seeing discipline as restriction. You start seeing it as protection. Protection of your energy, protection of your focus, protection of your identity. Because without that protection, the world will constantly ask you to trade pieces of yourself for temporary comfort. A quicker reply, a softer boundary, a small compromise, and each one feels harmless, until you look back and realize you have been slowly negotiating away the very thing you were trying to build. So at some point, you have to decide, not emotionally, not impulsively, but clearly, who are you becoming through your daily choices? Not who you want to be, not who you imagine yourself as, but who your actions are quietly confirming, moment after moment. Because time is not waiting for you to feel ready. It is recording everything, and in the long run, it does not reward intention. It rewards alignment. Here is the part most people don't expect. And if you miss this, you will build a version of strength that looks convincing on the outside, but is still fragile underneath. Because not every silence is power. Not every calm is strength. Not every act of detachment is growth. Sometimes what you call control is just avoidance in a more disciplined form. You say you are choosing silence, but in reality, you are afraid of confrontation. You say you are detached, but in reality, you are emotionally withdrawn because you don't want to feel vulnerable. You say you are at peace, but in reality, you have simply lowered your expectations so you don't have to face disappointment. And this is where pseudo-strength begins. It looks similar, it sounds similar, but it is built on a completely different foundation. Real Stoic strength is not about escaping discomfort. It is about facing it without losing yourself. It is not about avoiding conflict. It is about not being controlled by it. It is not about shutting down emotion. It is about mastering it without denying its existence. A person who is truly grounded can step into tension when necessary and remain steady. They can express themselves without over-explaining. They can set boundaries without needing to justify them endlessly. They can walk away when something is misaligned, but they are not running. They are choosing. That difference is everything, because avoidance shrinks your world. It teaches you to stay in what feels safe, predictable, controlled. But real strength expands your capacity. It allows you to remain composed even when things are uncertain, uncomfortable, or misunderstood. So you have to ask yourself something honestly. When you stay silent, is it because you are grounded or because you are unsure? When you detach, is it because you are free or because you are protecting yourself from something you don't want to face? When you let things go, is it because you have processed them or because you are suppressing them? These are uncomfortable questions, but they are necessary, because without them, you can spend years believing you are growing while actually reinforcing a more refined form of weakness. One that hides better, one that sounds wiser, one that is harder to detect even by yourself. And that is the most dangerous kind, because you won't challenge it. You'll defend it. You'll build an identity around it. You'll call it discipline. You'll call it maturity. But underneath, the same patterns remain. The same need for control, the same fear of being exposed, the same discomfort with not knowing where you stand. A real Stoic does not hide behind philosophy. They use it as a mirror, a tool to see themselves more clearly, not to protect themselves from truth. They don't pretend to be unaffected. They train themselves to remain stable while being fully aware, fully present, fully responsible for how they show up. And that requires a different level of honesty, the kind that doesn't let you escape into convenient labels, the kind that forces you to confront whether your calm is real or just rehearsed. Because if it's real, it will hold under pressure. It will remain when things don't go your way. It will stay when you are misunderstood, challenged, or ignored. But if it's not, it will crack the moment something hits the part of you that is still unresolved. And that is where the real work begins. Not in appearing strong, not in sounding wise, but in becoming someone who no longer needs to hide behind either. So now it comes down to this: not theory, not philosophy, not something to agree with and then forget tomorrow, a decision. Quiet, internal, but irreversible if you take it seriously. You can keep living the way you have been reacting, adjusting, explaining, trying to stay aligned with everything outside of you. You can keep checking your phone the moment it lights up. Keep overthinking how you are perceived. Keep giving your energy to moments that don't deserve it. And nothing dramatic will happen. Your life will still move forward. You will still function. But underneath, something will remain unstable. You will always feel slightly off balance, slightly dependent, slightly unsure of where you stand unless something external confirms it for you. Or you can choose something else. You can decide that your state is no longer negotiable, that your reactions are no longer automatic, that your value is no longer something you wait for others to reflect back to you. And that decision will not feel comfortable at first. It will feel unnatural. There will be moments where silence feels heavy, where not responding feels like losing control, where not explaining feels like risking misunderstanding. But those moments are not signs that you are doing something wrong. They are signs that you are stepping out of a pattern that once defined you. Because when you stop reacting the way you used to, you interrupt the identity that was built on those reactions, and that identity will resist. It will try to pull you back into old habits. It will tell you to fix things, to clarify, to engage, to regain control the way you always have. But this time, you don't follow it. This time, you hold your position. You let the moment pass without attaching yourself to it. You let people think what they think without rushing to correct it. You let silence exist without filling it. And slowly, something stabilizes. Not outside, inside. You begin to feel a different kind of certainty, one that doesn't come from being understood, One that doesn't come from being validated, but from knowing that you are no longer abandoning yourself in small, invisible ways. And that changes how you move. You become harder to shake, harder to influence, harder to pull into unnecessary dynamics. Not because you build walls, but because you build standards. And standards don't need to be enforced loudly. They are reflected in what you allow and what you no longer tolerate. This is what it means to act as if you are the best. Not arrogance, not ego, but a refusal to live below your own standard. A refusal to collapse into reactions that weaken you. A refusal to keep negotiating with a version of yourself that no longer represents who you are becoming. Because at the end of all of this, there is no audience deciding your value. There is no final moment where everything is confirmed. There is only you, moment after moment, deciding how you show up. Deciding what you engage with. Deciding what you give your energy to. And over time, those decisions become your identity. So the real question is not whether you are better than anyone else. It never was. The real question is whether you are finally ready to stop being less than who you could be. And once you answer that honestly, everything else becomes simple. Not easy, but clear.